It's kind of an underrated game. And I talked about this team a couple of weeks ago. Thought it was a team that maybe could pull the upset against Florida, and that was Kentucky. Mark Stoops has the Wildcats playing well. They ultimately beat Florida and do so in pretty convincing fashion. And Florida's still trying to find their way. That's some quarterback issues and some other stuff like that. And then all of a sudden now they're playing an LSU team, that is kind of underperformed this year, a little bit wounded, but ultimately they're fighting for their head coach's job. And, they've shown signs of life. And this is what's crazy, about LSU. We know how well they've recruited. The players that are on that roster. It's a function of getting the Jimmies and Joes to move around like the X's and O's that you put on the board. And so that comes down to coaching and whether the scheme doesn't fit the players that you have, or you're not communicating the scheme well enough. Maybe they're not well disciplined enough. There's a multitude of things it could ultimately be. But Kentucky was favored in this game, so it really wasn't an upset. But to see Kentucky come in and dominate that game 42-21, the way that they did, I think that's the thing that is the most impressive, is that not only were they able to win and kind of trick them around, they rushed for 330 yards. LSU, for the life of me, for the last 20 years, they've had shaky quarterback play at times. Maybe their offenses looked a little antiquated. They generally can run the football pretty well, but defensively, they've always been good. They've had great defensive backs. And for a large portion of it, they've had terrific linebackers and just some studs up front on the defensive line. And if I'm an LSU fan, I'm sitting here looking at this thinking, I just watched Kentucky roll up 330 yards. Now I know Kentucky's ranked, and they're hovering now, right outside of the top 10. They're sitting at 11, and they were in the teens coming into this game, and they were favored to win it. But there's still something that like proud fan bases have a hard time letting go of. And it's the uniform you're looking at. It's the laundry on the field, to steal a little Jerry Seinfeld reference there. You're cheering for laundry. And so LSU fans, when they see Kentucky, that's fine in basketball. We can lose to UK and Big Blue Nation in basketball, but in football, this is our sport. And I don't care where you're ranked. I don't care who you've beaten. We're still the LSU Tigers. No different than Auburn has that type of pride. Bama does. Ohio State does. Penn State, Michigan. You go around Oklahoma, OU. And so no matter how good they are, it still pains you as a Sooners fan if you would lose to a Kansas. I don't care if Kansas is great at football and they're a top 15 program. You still look at it and you say, hey, we're better than they are because of who we are. Ohio State losing to an Indiana or Purdue, like, we're better than they are just because of who we are. I don't care who is lining up for them. I don't care where they're ranked. And so I say that to try to give some relative perspective, like a USC losing to an Oregon State. Like, they don't have the history. They don't have the players. They're not there. And so for LSU, who has struggled this year, to lose to Kentucky, who's played really well, and give Mark Stoops a ton of credit. He's built a good defense. They brought Will Levis in. He's looked the part. He hasn't been great, but he hasn't gotten them beat. And when you rush for 330, it's pretty darn easy to play quarterback. And so I don't call for people to be fired outside of crimes against humanity where you're injuring another person. I'm not going to sit here and ever call for someone's job. It's sports. And I'm passionate about it. I love it, but it's between the administration and the head coach and whether he can still win games, whether he can get on the road and go recruit and bring the players in, because that's the lifeblood of it. And I love Coach Ed Orgeron. I find him highly entertaining. I think he'd be a guy that I'd ultimately love to play for just by the way he carries himself. I don't think anyone's going to confuse Coach O with being the greatest X's and O's coach in college football history, but I believe guys like him and they want to play for him. And when you have good assistants around you, when you've got the Bradys around you, you got Joe Brady over there. If you have a Dave Aranda, when you got these other guys who are pretty good, I think that makes a big difference. Now, when you don't have that, you don't have the scheme to match up with the chestiness and the bravado of Coach O. I think you see what you're seeing right now. I'm surprised he didn't get fired after this game, and I'm not calling for that. But if I'm an LSU fan, I know that they're probably scratching their head right now trying to figure out what's going on. we're losing to Kentucky and losing in a big way, getting embarrassed. And so I just I don't see him surviving the end of this year outside of maybe beating Alabama or something crazy, going on some sort of epic run, which when you're losing, like they have, and you look kind of the way they have, I don't see that transpiring. I think they've done some good things and there are some redeeming qualities and some stuff about the team, but when you just get beat like that, Kentucky, and I understand, like I said, they're 11th, and that's important because they're good. They're a really good squad. But if you're an LSU Tiger fan, you're sick and tired of losing to a team like Kentucky. Like, that isn't happening, and we don't want it to happen again. And no different, I said, than Ohio State losing to an Indiana or a Purdue, or whether it's OU losing to a Kansas or a Missouri or something like that. Like, historically, we've just been better than you, and I know we have better players. So if we have better players and we've historically always been better, that only leaves one thing, the coaching. And so I'm not calling for it. I just don't see Ed Orgeron surviving the season. I have no idea what the odds are on that, but I would guess that's probably the heavy favorite right now, is him not being renewed and coming back for a 2022 campaign. And so that kind of wraps up a little the SEC. Red River. Oh, goodness. I mean, you thought this was going to be it. Sark had him greased up, ready to go. You open the game with a big score. You've got him on the ropes. Lincoln Riley's pulling his quarterback. My goodness, then all of a sudden that thing flips and you have to come back, and you just have some of the worst tackling and defensive performances down the stretch. And give credit to Caleb Williams, give credit to Lincoln Riley for making the decision they did. You're pulling a guy who was the odds-on Heisman favorite to begin the season. I want everyone to realize that. Like, Spencer Rattler was the odds-on Heisman favorite to start the season. People thought when he enters the draft, number 1 overall pick, top 5, top 10 for sure. And you pull him and you put in Caleb Williams, another 5-star guy who comes in and looks really good. And ultimately they win the game because of what he's able to do. Texas, they had it right there. If they beat Oklahoma, I think there's a lot of chaos because there's even more uncertainty at the top. You don't have another undefeated blue blood in one of the Power 5 conferences. You have another 1 loss. And so I think that spins everything a little bit more, takes it up the crazy cycle a little bit to a higher level. And so Oklahoma survives and advances. I think they'll end up losing a game at some point this year. I'm not sure when, but some of the things that they've done, some games it's offensively, some things it's defensively. And ultimately we'll see what they do with the quarterback. I would think that it'd be Caleb Williams' job moving forward, and that he'll ultimately be the guy. You never know how these things handle and how they move forward. So progress. So we'll see kind of what happens there and what Lincoln Riley decides to do, but they obviously have their hands full in Norman with a lot of decisions they're going to have to make. And I don't know if it'll be the defense one week or the offense another. I just can't see this team, with how high and low they've been, being able to survive this full slate going undefeated, but maybe they can. Like, maybe they'll see Texas again in the Big 12 championship, and maybe it'll be a different story. So, there's always that as well to kind of dive into.